Hello students, welcome back to this explanation of the novel Great Expectations, and here in this video I will be explaining the stage 2, that is becoming a gentleman in name only, of the Great Expectations, which covers from chapter 20 to 49. Okay, so these chapters, again, this stage 2 will be in 2 videos. So this is the first video of this stage 2, becoming a gentleman in name only. This will be the first video covering from chapter 20 to around 29, and in the next video I will be again covering chapter 30 to 39. Okay, so let's start. Here in these are the brief highlights chapter wise. Okay, so in chapter 20 you will find that Pip arrives in gritty, dirty London and goes to Mr. Jacker's office in Little Britain. The office is greasy and rundown, gloomy, very gloomily decorated with weapons and cast of sullen faces. Mr. Jackers is in court and Wemmick, Jacker's clerk, shows Pip in. While waiting, Pip takes a walk through filthy, bloody neighborhood of Smithfield, passing the black-domed St. Paul's and Newgate prison, where a dirty, drunken minister of justice shows up, Pip the gallows, public whipping post and debtor's door, and tries to sell Pip a spectator's seat at a trial. Back at Mr. Jacker's office, Pip sees a ragtag group of poor, dirty, miserable clients waiting for Jackers as well. Mr. Jackers returns and sharply dismisses each of his clients, checking to make sure they have paid Wemmick, and threatening to drop their cases if they try to involve themselves any further. Mr. Jackers refuses to take on the cases of a Jewish man. He disgustedly dismisses another client who has brought a falsely disguised dishonest witness. Mr. Jackers tells Pip he will stay at Bernard's Inn with Matthew Pocket's son. He reveals Pip's generous allowances, informing Pip that he will be keeping an eye on Pip's spending, though he is sure Pip will manage to go wrong somewhere. Okay, in chapter 21, Wemmick walks Pip to Bernard's Inn, and Pip observes his wooden features and all the little tokens of mourning that Wemmick wears. Pip asks Wemmick if London is wicked, and Wemmick replies that one can get cheated, robbed, and murdered there just like anyone anywhere else. When Pip suggests people commit such crimes just for revenge, Wemmick corrects him, saying many people commit crimes for profit. Wemmick seems surprised that Pip finds crime for profit to be worse than crime committed for revenge. After depositing Pip at Bernard's, Wemmick is surprised by Pip's offer to shake hands. Pip is appalled by the dismissal state of Bernard's Inn, which is sooty, rotting, and infested. He waits for young Mr. Pocket to return and let him know the rooms. Mr. Pocket returns with fresh fruits he had bought in Pip's honor, and very graciously welcomes Pip into the grim apartment, apologizing for its condition and explaining that he and his father are poor. He and Pip suddenly recognize one another. Young Mr. Pocket is the pale young gentleman Pip fought with in Miss Havisham's greenhouse. In the next chapter, you will find that the pale young gentleman. Okay, in chapter 22, that gentleman is Herbert Pocket, and he explains that his father, Matthew Pocket, is Miss Havisham's cousin. Herbert was in Miss Havisham's greenhouse that day after Miss Havisham sent for him to see if he might be a suitable betrothed for Stella. Herbert criticizes Stella for being rude and haughty and explains that she is Miss Havisham's adopted daughter, raised to wreak revenge on all the male sex. Pip is immediately struck by Herbert's open, kind personality. He explains his background and asks Herbert to correct his country manners. When Herbert asks Pip's name, Pip says it is Philip. Herbert, disliking the name, decides to call Pip Handel, after Handel's piece, The Harmonious Blacksmith. Okay, so Pip got another name, that is Handel, given by Herbert. At dinner, Herbert tell Miss Havisham's story. Miss Havisham was the spoiled daughter of a wealthy, gentle brewer. Her mother died early, and her father secretly married and had a son with his cook. Though raised apart of the family, this son was rebellious, and his father left him a much smaller inheritance than he left Miss Havisham, which built resentment between her and her half-brother, that is Arthur, Arthur Havisham. Miss Havisham fell in love and was engaged to a man to whom she gave a great deal of money, that is Compeyson, and who convinced her to buy her half-brother out of his share in the brewery. On their wedding day, the man never showed up. Rumors had that he had conspired with Miss Havisham's vengeful half-brother, though Herbert does not know the two men's whereabouts any longer. Miss Havisham was devastated within the house, essentially stopped time to the minutes she had been betrayed. All of Miss Havisham's relations were poor, and all of them, except for Matthew Pocket, were jealous and scheming. He alone had warned Miss Havisham about her fiancé, perceiving that the man was only superficially gentle. Miss Havisham, though, was offended by the warning and accused Mr. Pocket of trying to get her money for himself. Herbert concludes by telling Pip that he has revealed everything he knows about Miss Havisham. He promised that nothing shall come between he and Pip in future, and swears never to inquire about Pip's patron. Pip thinks that Herbert is implicitly acknowledging that Miss Havisham is Pip's patron. Herbert enthusiastically describes his own ambition of becoming a capitalist and insurer of ships. Though he is currently working underpaid in a counting house, Pip privately suspects that Herbert will never succeed in business. The next day, Herbert takes Pip to Matthew Pocket's house in the countryside outside London. There they meet Mrs. Pocket reading in the garden, blissfully oblivious to 6 of his children tumbling over the footstool, concealing below her skirt. She and the children are attended by 2 frustrated maids, Millers and Flupson. Mrs. Pocket acts absent-mindedly and unfamiliar with her children. Pip learns that Mrs. Pocket is the only daughter of a deceased knight who, though poor, was pompously proud of his title, had ordered that his daughter be raised without learning any practical domestic skills, and that she must marry a title. She eloped with Mr. Pocket. Her father had no dowry to give her but his blessing. Mrs. Pocket is pitied by Mrs. Coiler and others because she had not married a title. Mr. Pocket is blamed for never getting a title. A harried but unaffected Mr. Pocket shows Pip his room and introduces him to fellow students Bentley, Drumley, and Hare, to baronetcy and Startop. At dinner, Pip observes that the Pocket's servants wield greater power in the household than the Pockets themselves. Mr. Pocket reveals that the book she was reading so avidly is a book on titles. When the children are brought in after dinner, Mrs. Pocket allows the baby to play with nutcrackers while she discusses baronetcies with Bentley Drumley, and scolds her older child Jen for suggesting that baby might be in danger. Mr. Pocket protests his wife's negligence to no avail and falls silent. After dinner, Bentley, Drumley, and Startop go rowing, and Pip, wanting to be trained in this gentle sport, hires someone to train him, though he is deeply offended when the trainer praises him for having the arm of a blacksmith. In chapter 24, we find that several days later, Mr. Pocket tells Pip that he has been told by Mr. Jaggers that Pip is not to be trained for any particular profession but to be educated as a young man of wealth. Pip accepts this plan. He and Mr. Pocket get along well, and Pip finds him serious, honest, and good. Several days later, Mr. Pocket tells Pip that he had been told by Mr. Jaggers that Pip is not to be trained for any particular profession. After this, we find that after dispensing his money to Pip, Wemmick gives Pip a tour of Mr. Jaggers' office, and Pip sees four other shabby clerks, and learns that the plaster cast are death marks of famous clients. That earn the practice credit. One a murderer, the other a forger. Wemmick describes them fondly and explains that all of his mourning accessories are gifts from Mr. Jaggers' client who were killed for their crimes. He tells Pip that he always takes these mementos when offered, as his motto is to get hold of portable property. Wemmick invites Pip to visit him at home in Walworth. He also warns Pip that if he ever goes to Mr. Jaggers' house, he should look for his housekeeper, who is a wild beast tamed. In chapter 25, Pip describes his peers Bentley and Startop. Bentley is stupid, idle, proud, niggardly, reserved, and suspicious. Startop has been spoiled and made effeminated by an overprotective mother, but Pip much prefers his company to Drumley's. His best friend is Herbert. A few weeks later, Pip arranges to tell Wemmick upon his dinner invitation to Walworth. They meet at Jaggers' office, and Wemmick describes some of Mr. Jaggers' personal habits to Pip. Mr. Jaggers never locks his door or windows at night and carries a massive, expensive gold watch. Yet Mr. Jaggers is so infamous among thieves in London that no one would ever be brave enough to rob him. Pip and Wemmick walks to Walworth, which is an eccentric, tiny, imitation Gothic cottage with a drawbridge, a flagstaff, a gun, and livestock. Wemmick is proud of building everything himself. Inside, he introduces Pip to his near-deaf father, the aged, to whom Wemmick is tenderly beloved. Wemmick's manner at Walmouth is jovial and warm. He explains to Pip that he keeps office life and private life completely separate, and that Mr. Jaggers has never heard of Walworth. Walking back to Little Britain from Walworth the next morning, Pip notices that Wemmick's facial expression stiffens as he nears the office. In chapter 26, the morning That morning, Mr. Jackers invite Pip along with Drumley, Startop, and Herbert to dinner. The next day, Mr. Jacker's house is dark and serious. Throughout the visit, Mr. Jackers is most interested in Drumley, whom he called one of the true sort, although he advises Pip to steer clear of him. During the lavish dinner, Pip notices that Mr. Jackers wrenched the weakest part of our disposition out of us, inspiring the boys to bicker competitively about rowing and money. Pip notes that Drumley leaves Mr. Pockets for good for a month after this dinner. Mr. Jacker's only servant is his housekeeper Molly, Wemmick is whom Wemmick mentioned and has urged Pip to take note of. She is quite witch-like woman with streaming hair, completely submissive to Mr. Jackers. Pip images her face above a cauldron. The adult Pip narrator alludes to a vision he will have to her face year later by fire in a dark room. When the boys bigger about who is stronger, Mr. Jackers forces her to show the boys her wrist, which has scars and disfigured. Okay, and Mr. Jackers claimed the strongest he has ever seen. In chapter 27, Pip receives a letter from Biddy informing him that Joe is traveling to London the next day with Mr. Wopsley and plans to visit Pip. She reminds Pip of Joe's goodness. Pip is distressed by the news and thinks that if he could pay to keep Joe away, he would. His only conclusion is that Drumley won't see Joe. Joe will come to Bernard's Inn apartment, which Pip has recently decorated splendidly at with an enormous expenses. Pip has also hired a servant boy, the Avenger, whom he dresses in fancy waistcoat and boots but has very little use for. When Joe arrives, Pip is painfully aware of his country manners, awkward clothes, and discomfort. Joe calls Pip Sir against Pip's protests. He tells Pip Mr. Wopsley has left the village for London in order to pursue his dreams of acting and hands Pip the playbill for Mr. Wopsley's first play. When Herbert leaves for work, Joe tells Pip he has only come to convey a message from Mrs. Havisham that Stella is home, would like to see Pip. Joe says Biddy had encouraged him to tell Pip in person, then good-natured apologized Mr. Joe, and says that he and Pip are now different stations in life and shouldn't meet in public. He says his place is at the forge. Blesses Pip and leaves. Pip is impressed by Joe's dignity and runs after him, but Joe has disappeared. In chapter 28, Pip arranges to return to the village and the next day, but makes excuses to himself to justify staying at the Blue Boar instead of at the forge. The adult Pip narrator calls himself a self-swindler. On the coach of his town, Pip rides with two convicts, one of which Pip recognizes as the man he met at the Three Jolly Birchmen. Pip is grateful that the man didn't recognize him. During the ride, Pip overhears the man recounting how another convict had asked him to find the little boy that had fed him and kept his secret, and give him 2 one-pound notes. At the Blue Boar, Pip reads Mr. Pumblechook's tiny disgusted article in the local newspaper, crediting himself as Pip's mentor, friend, and first patron. In chapter 29, going to Miss Havisham's the next morning, Pip is surprised. Pip is surprised to find Orlick employed as the potter to protect the house from convicts and intruders. When he enters Miss Havisham's room, he finds Stella home from France and transformed into a beautiful, graceful woman. Pip and Stella walk in the garden and recount old times. Stella notes the changes in Pip and observes that he has necessarily stopped keeping company with his childhood friend. When Pip is hurt that Stella does not remember making him cry, Stella informs him that he has no heart. Okay? He has no heart. As they walk, Pip is bothered by the nagging suspicion that Stella resembles someone whom he cannot place. So back in the house, Miss Havisham speaks friendly to Pip and Stella. She tells Pip real love is blind devotion, unquestioning self-humiliation, utter submission, surrendering oneself as I did. Okay, so Mr. Jacker has come by on business, and Miss Havisham, Sarah Pocket, Stella, and Pip have dinner together. Mr. Jackers is unaffected by Stella's beauty and ignores her. Pip is disturbed by this behavior between Mr. Jackers' cold presence and his own warm feelings for Stella, resenting that the two must share space. As she falls asleep at the Blue Boar, Miss Havisham's injunction to love her resounds in Pip's mind, and he feels grateful, convinced that Miss Havisham is his patron and that Stella must therefore be destined to be his wife. Okay, so this is all for this video. I will continue the remaining chapters in the next video. Thank you.